Hello and welcome to Before You Pull, where we will show off the kits and details of upcoming characters as well as some recommended teams and disc setups to help you plan your pulls. All of the following is from the creator server, so things are still subject to change. This time around though, we're going over Harumasa, who everyone will be getting for free. So congrats, you've already pulled him. But let's go over his kit though to get you clued in on how he plays. Harumasa is the first attacker we've gotten since Shien in 1.0, and funnily enough, the best way I can describe him is that he is kind of like an electric Shien. He plays very similarly to her in that he has to build up certain stacks to be able to use a flurry of enhanced dash attacks. He builds up these stacks by either doing a full basic attack string using an EX skill or a chain attack, which is very similar to Shien. Doing any of those mentioned attacks drop electro quivers on the floor. Then, by using a different attack, for example this aim in bow shot, these electro quivers shoot at the enemy, applying stacks of electro prison. Enemies with electro prison are then considered X marked, so you're gonna hear me interchanging X mark and electro prison a lot in this video. Now, while the enemy is X marked, Harumasa can then use the enhanced dash attacks in succession, consuming some of these marks with each attack. But let's take a closer look at some of his skills though, starting with the simplest, and that is going to be his EX special, which is pretty standard: shoot some arrows, do some damage, but it also drops 6 of those electro quivers. Again, what we need to apply the X mark effect. His chain attack is also able to generate 6 quivers, although his ultimate does not, at least at Mindscapes 0. His assists are your pretty standard parry attacks, but his basic attacks are the important thing, as this is his primary method of enabling the enhanced slashes. So, by default he has a standard 5-hit attack string, but after the 5th hit, he generates 2 electro quivers. After Harumasa performs a chain attack though, the next time he does a full 5-hit string, it generates 6 quivers instead. So the chain attack itself generates 6, and then the next time you do a full basic attack string, another 6. But next up is the falling feather attack. This is the attack that converts these electro quivers on the ground to electro prison marks by causing those quivers to shoot out an extra attack on an enemy called Haoto no Ya. And as a reminder, once an enemy has at least 2 of these electro prison stacks, they become X marked. Now there are 2 ways to do this falling feather attack. One is by holding down the attack button, which puts you into an aiming mode, which is very easy to control and it magnetizes very hard to the enemy, so you don't have to worry about missing your shots. And it's a pretty fast attack as well. The other way to do this attack is by holding down the skill button after performing a full basic attack string, a special attack, or a chain attack. And instead you do this sort of backflip shot instead, which will also do the similar thing of converting the quivers into electro prison marks. Now, whenever there are enemies that are X marked, Harumasa will be in an awakened state. This is shown off with his bow glowing blue. This means that if you perform a dash attack, you actually do an enhanced rush down on the target enemy. You can also go into this dash attack directly after using the aimed falling feather attack by just continuing mashing the attack button. Now, you can repeatedly use the enhanced slash attack multiple times in a row, but each time you do, it removes 2 stacks of electro prison from the enemy, and electro prison can only stack up to 8 times. So the typical loop for Harumasa is drop your electro quivers, convert those quivers into X marks, then rush them down with enhanced attacks, and then rinse and repeat. Now that we've talked about Harumasa's enhanced dash attacks though, let's go into his core skills, starting with the upgradable passive, which give specifically those enhanced dash attacks an increased crit rate. And then when these attacks do score a critical hit, it applies a stack of Gleaming Edge up to a maximum of 6 stacks, lasting 5 seconds, but refreshing on repeated triggers. And for each stack of Gleaming Edge, the crit damage of these enhanced dash attacks is also increased. The values of these increases are dependent on the core skill level. So again, if it wasn't clear already, you really want to be doing your best when it comes to getting out these enhanced dash attacks, as that is his main source of damage. As for his team passive, it's an interesting one. He requires either a stun or an anomaly agent on the team. No faction or element requirement. But when this passive is triggered, Harumasa just straight up does 40% more damage, specifically to enemies that are either stunned or under an attribute anomaly. And what's more is that when Falling Feather hits a stunned or anomaly affected enemy, it will apply 2 extra stacks of Electro Prison. So you'll notice a lot of the skills I mentioned earlier that generate Electro Quivers only make 6, which would lead to 6 stacks of X mark even though there is a maximum cap of 8. And this passive is how you can get those other 2 stacks easily, which means 1 extra enhanced enhanced dash attack. As mentioned, he plays very much like Xu Yan, although I will say it does feel like the loop of doing the quivers and then using another attack to convert those quivers into marks, and then only having 4 enhanced attacks as opposed to having 9 with Xu Yan, before having to repeat the loop to recharge those attacks. It does feel a little bit more involved to get this loop going, but I think this could be something that some people might enjoy actually. This is an action game after all, and I would imagine that having more action in the gameplay would be a bit more appealing to some out there. And speaking of comparisons to Xu Yan, let's talk about some teams. So I actually tested a team of Anby, Nicole, and then either Xu Yan or Harumasa to compare the two against the Big Mech Notorious Hunt Boss, and they were both very similar in clear times, with about 2 minutes and 30 odd seconds each on average. And funnily enough, that is actually the first team I would recommend for Harumasa. Since Anby and Nicole are both A ranks and I'm sure everyone has them, it's a lot easier to recommend. Of course, if you have a better stunner or Caesar that can replace Anby and then switch Nicole out with a different support of your choice, that will also work. The interesting thing though, coming back to the team passive, is that Harumasa can also work with an anomaly team, and any anomaly really, since, like I said, he's not tied down to any specific element. So he can be quite flexible, which is good I think for a free unit. But moving on to Harumasa's signature engine though, we have the Zanshin Herb Case. It gives crit damage as its main stat, and as for its effect, it gives 10% crit rate for free, both of which are of course greatly appreciated. But then it also increases the dash attack's electric damage by 40%, so this in combination with the extra crit damage can really start to rack up. But what's more is that when an enemy is stunned or has an anomaly applied, the equipper's crit rate increases by an additional 10% for 15 seconds. As usual, the engine is tailor-made for Harumasa, heavily focused on increasing crit rate and crit damage, and then boosting the dash attacks too. But again, as usual, there are alternatives. Essentially, any other crit rate engine you might have can work, or the trusty old Starlight engine, or even an event engine. Next up are his disc sets. Since neither of the two new sets in 1.4 really favor his kit, you can instead go for the pretty standard 2-piece Woodpecker Electro to increase his crit rate, and then for me in my gameplay, I was using a 4-piece Thunder Metal set, but that's because I had Anby on the team as well, so there was extra chances for building up the Shock Anomaly to get that extra attack percentage. Now depending on your team, this could of course be different, so instead if you aren't consistently getting Shock applied, you could instead switch the 4 and 2-piece around and have say 4-piece Woodpecker and only 2-piece Thunder Metal. For the main stats, attack in slot 6, electric damage in slot 5, and then a crit of your choice of either crit damage or crit rate, depending on what you need to get a good balance for slot 4. And lastly are the Cinema Mindscapes, which you might be tempted to go for since we already start at Mindscape 0. Mindscape 1 increases the maximum stacks of Electro Prison from 8 to 14, which essentially means now you can do 7 enhanced slashes in a row, and what's more is that when an Electro Quiver is triggered with Falling Arrow, 2 Haoto no Ya are shot out instead of just 1. And again, these are the things that apply the Electro Prison, so effectively you're doubling the rate at which you are stacking up the X mark effect. So even though there's a maximum of 14 stacks now, you still only need 6 quivers from a skill or a chain attack, and then an extra 2 from the team passive. Mindscape 2 causes chain attacks and ultimates to give 7 stacks of Electro Blitz, where each stack of this buff is consumed to increase the damage of the enhanced dash attack by 50%. Again, 7 stacks is perfect for the previous Mindscape where we now have a maximum of 7 dash attacks. Mindscape 4 extends the duration of Electro Prison on enemies from 10 seconds to 20 seconds, and then the enhanced dash attacks now also generate an extra 30 decibels per attack. And then once you have enough decibels to use your ultimate, it also applies maximum stacks of Electro Prison to all enemies when used, letting you loop into the dash attacks right away. And lastly, Mindscape 6 makes it so that when Haoto no Ya hits a stunned or anomaly inflicted enemy, so in other words, when you use Falling Feather to apply Electro Prison, Harumasa then ignores 15% of their electric resistance for 12 seconds. And then every 12 times they are hit by the quivers, an extra burst of damage is dealt equal to 1500% of Harumasa's attack. As for my closing thoughts, all in all, I can't really complain about Harumasa. He is being given out for free after all, and he's a very capable attacker that is on par with what we've seen from previous limited attackers, i.e. Xu Yan. Which is a good thing, because I think not many people may have access to Xu Yan because she was all the way back in patch 1.0. So I think Harumasa will definitely be a warm welcome to everyone's roster, and like I said, his gameplay loop is a little bit more active than Xu Yan's, which can make things a bit more fun. His attacks are definitely flashier too with all of of his flips and slashes and bow attacks, as opposed to just shooting a Nerf gun. Otherwise though, thank you for watching. If you found this video helpful, liking, commenting and subscribing is greatly appreciated. And in the meantime, why not consider checking out the Miyabi guide that I have? Or if you're curious to know more about the upcoming decibel system changes, I have a video for that too. If you are planning on pulling for Harumasa, I wish you the best of luck in your pulls. And so, until next time, bye bye.